You guys remember a guy named Dan Satterberg? So Dan Satterberg was the very corrupt former Republican King County prosecutor. And when I did the local radio show, I invented a name for him, Heroin Dan Satterberg. And with Dow Constantine, the King County executive, it was Smack Daddy Dow. And Bob Ferguson was Sideshow Bob Ferguson. And I'll tell you, the power of these words is the former prosecutor, Satterberg, was in line at a grocery store, and I knew the lady in the checkout because we'd been going through the same line for 13 years, and I knew about her kids. And so people went through. She said, "I have to tell you something. There was a guy in my line buying groceries, and a woman came up to him and said, 'I know who you are.' And he had a suit on. He said, 'Do you?' 'Yes, you're the King County prosecutor.' 'Yes, I am.' 'Yes, you're Heroin Dan Satterberg.'" And he said, my name is, it's King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg. And the same thing happened to Bob Ferguson at an event. A guy stood in line, all to go up to him and say, "Sideshow Bob." And it stuck. So the power of words. There is, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. So Jesus Christ became the Word, Word became flesh. I think God values words. I think it's an expression of our conscience. I think our conscience is our bridge to God. This is why the First Amendment is so important and backed up by the Second Amendment. This is all a preface to say, I think you're going to witness a proof of the inevitable, omnipotent, omniscient power of God versus the limited powers of Satan. Mean it. Because when Riley gets up here to talk, Riley Gaines, she's a legendary swimmer, record setter, and if Satan had omnipotence and omniscience, he never would have picked Riley Gaines to be attacked by Leah Thomas in an attempt to steal her medals. And in fact, I bet you there are demons who've been demoted because Satan said, "What the blank were you thinking? You brought the wrong woman to the fight." So with that, I want to welcome a woman who at this point doesn't need a lot of introduction, but we're very grateful for the cost she decided to put on herself. Ladies and gentlemen, Riley Gaines.
You guys are so kind. Todd, thank you for the wonderful introduction. In a room where I am well received, especially in the state of Washington, that is not how I thought I was going to be perceived. But I'll tell you, I learned very quickly that Gig Harbor is a lot different than Seattle. So I could not be more honored and grateful to be here. I certainly feel more supported and encouraged in this room than I did in San Francisco a few months back. Yeah, which was my first mistake going to San Francisco. But I went there to deliver a very similar message to what I'm sharing with you guys. I was actually at San Francisco State University, so a college setting. I was naive to think that these students and community members would come with an open mind and the willingness to have their hearts softened, because they did not. They came with pitchforks and fire, really. And upon delivering my message, a similar forum, it was a classroom, so of course, a podium at the front, doors in the back. And upon delivering my message, a group of protesters, hundreds of them, they rush into the room. There's men wearing dresses. There's women with beards. It was incredibly disorienting. It doesn't help that they turned off the lights. They rush to the front. I'm being pushed. I'm being shoved. I'm being punched in the face by these men wearing dresses, which, fortunately for me, their punches really don't hurt that bad. But ultimately, these protesters, they ended up holding me for ransom throughout the middle of the night, demanding that if I wanted to make it home to see my family safely again, I had to pay them money. You might be wondering, okay, well, where are the police? Guys, it's San Francisco. The police were being held for ransom with me. I'm looking at the officers. Seriously, I'm looking at the officers. Pretty sure we're being held against our will. Pretty sure we call that kidnapping. Pretty sure you have a gun. Not saying you should use it, but you do have one. Isn't there something you can do? To which they said, no, there's nothing we can do. We're not allowed to do anything because we're not allowed to be seen as anything other than an ally to this community. The same community who's on the other side of the door, calling these officers racist pigs for protecting a white girl like me. Anyways, the dean of students shows up. It's like midnight at this point, the middle of the night, and starts negotiating with the students how much I owe each of them to be able to leave. Which the price they agreed upon was $10 each, which makes me mad because I think I'm worth more than $10. But anyways, we were eventually able to get out of this room. But the next day, the vice president of student affairs of the university, her name is Dr. Jamila Moore, she sent out a university-wide email that morning after it had garnered national attention overnight. Sent out this email to professors and faculty and staff and the entire student body. And in this email, she said, we are so proud of our brave students for handling Riley Gaines in the manner that they did. We know how deeply traumatic her presence is on this campus, and so here are some counseling resources for you guys. Take the day off of school. Just know that we see you, we hear you, we love you, and we stand with you. Nowhere in this email did it say we condemn violence against women for that matter. Nowhere in this email did it say we uphold our First Amendment rights and the freedom of speech. No, of course not. And actually just recently, the police department got back with me, and they said that there was no evidence anywhere to charge anyone. They couldn't charge the individual students. They couldn't charge the university. They couldn't charge the police department for failing at their most basic duties and ensuring my safety. Despite what a quick Google search would show them, there's an ample amount of audio, video, eyewitness testimony to this. Certainly feel more welcome in this room than I did even testifying before Congress most recently. I've had to testify before Congress and the Senate many times now, which it is unfathomable to me that a 23-year-old, now 24, but 23 at the time, recent college graduate, college swimmer at that, has to go to D.C. to sit in front of Congress, the beating heart of the American Republic, and explain to them that men and women are different. And then to be on the other side of this table and watch as they have these super confused looks on their faces. But that's what I was there to do, urging the Biden administration to halt with their illegal administrative rewrite of Title IX, which, as you have been able to tell over this past month, clearly they did not listen to my pleas. But it was in front of a subcommittee of the Oversight and Accountability Committee. And so the ranking member of this committee is Representative Lee, Democrat from Pennsylvania. She's one of those pesky squad members. And she reads her opening monologue to this hearing. And the first words that come out of her mouth, she says, "I can't believe that I'm forced to sit here and listen to her transphobic bigotry." And my heart broke. Really, I didn't feel mad. I didn't feel angry or frustrated. I felt entirely demoralized and disheartened that a sitting member of Congress doesn't try to dissuade from my stance with logic or facts or reasoning or common sense or lived experience or science. What happened to follow the science? No, instead resorts to name calling. And so it's my turn to read my testimony, and I read it, And I truly, I didn't even mean to say this last little bit. It accidentally just came out of my mouth. But I looked at her and I said, Representative Lee, if my testimony makes me transphobic, then understand by your own logic, your opening monologue makes you a misogynist, which sent the hearing into a tailspin. It was as if that is not the response that she had. It was as if she had never actually and accurately heard the word misogynist used in a sentence. Of course, her staff comes running over, her counsel comes running over, pulling up their phones. I literally think they looked up the definition, because about 60 seconds later, she raises her hand and she said, I want her words removed from the record on the grounds of engaging in personalities, whatever that means. But Marjorie Taylor Greene was in that hearing. And so she buzzes in. And before anyone else could say anything, she says, I would call a man posing as a woman someone who's engaging in personalities. And then it's like the Jerry Springer show. I'm like, oh gosh, what have I done? Which we kind of just got part 2 this past week with Marjorie Taylor Greene. So all of that to say, and I'll tell you my thought process there in these brief moments where I had to come up with a way to use her own intersectional language against her. Let's be very clear about the stand that I have taken. The stand that I have taken is not a stand that's against anything. It's not anti anything. No, it's pro something. I'm standing for something, and what I'm standing for is women. My stand is very much pro-woman. But why is it that being pro-woman is immediately deemed anti-trans? Okay, and if that's the case, then wouldn't being pro-trans inherently be anti-woman? And what do we call someone who's anti-woman? We call them a misogynist. So let it be known that congressional record still stands. She is, in fact, listed as a misogynist. Someone even sent me her Wikipedia page the other day, and at the very bottom of it, it says, as of whatever day, she's a misogynist, which I think is awesome. I could stand up here for the rest of the time, truly, and share these almost comical, adverse situations that I have found myself in. But again, just to share with you guys how glad and how grateful I am to be in this room. But a little bit about me. I graduated from University of Kentucky in 2022, where I got my degree in human health sciences and health law. I was in dental school after college, set to be a dentist, actually an endodontist, weirdly enough, which is root canals, basically. That's what I was set to do, which I think this might be more painful than a root canal. In my senior year of college, I had gotten married to my really cute 6'4" British husband, who now living in Nashville has like this awesome country British accent. It rocks. It would have been really easy for me, really safe, really secure for me to essentially ride off into the sunset with the plans that I had made for myself. But I realized that the quickest way to make God laugh in your face is to make plans for yourself, because he very clearly had different plans for me. And I kind of justify his calling now by saying I'm still working on getting to the root of the problem coming out of people's mouths. So it's kind of still like a root canal, at least. But a little bit about my swimming. Started swimming when I was 4, graduated when I was 22, so dedicated 18 years of my life to my sport, which I don't have to explain this to you guys, what this looks like, right? There are athletes in the room, parents of athletes in the room, some of you former athletes, some of you very former athletes in the room. You know the time, you know the hours, you know the dedication, the sacrifices that you have to make to compete at and ultimately be successful at the highest level. And I was no different. Flash forward here. High school rolls around. I began getting recruited for college. I never, ever, ever was going to come to Washington State. I'm sorry. It's way too cold up here. It's way too rainy and gray, although it really is beautiful. Are you guys at altitude here? Probably. No, I guess the sea's right there, so that would be stupid. I feel like there's mountains. Yeah, no way was I coming here. I'm sorry, I'm biased. The SEC is, in fact, the best conference. Yeah. I knew I was going to stay in the SEC. My dad, he was an SEC football player. I will say my Uncle Greg, he played 12 plus years with the Seahawks. My dad's oldest brother, he was there when Steve Largent was there. Spent a long time there. All my family, SEC athletes. My dad, he played professional as well. I knew I was going to stay in the SEC, all that to say. Did not know I was going to go to University of Kentucky. I thought the only things that came from Kentucky were like meth and Mountain Dew, which I was interested in neither of those things. But really, I took a trip on a whim there, and there could not have been a better place for me. And just very briefly, I very proudly finished my career at University of Kentucky as a 12-time NCAA All-American, a 5-time SEC champion. Y'all are sweet. The SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, making me one of the fastest Americans of all time. 2-time Olympic trial qualifier, SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year, SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. But again, just to say it's a lifelong journey. And accomplishments I know wouldn't have been possible without Title IX, the women's sporting category. Flash forward, I dealt with COVID during college, which was miserable, to say the least. And I think it was, especially being a college athlete, I would say being a college student, being a human during the time of COVID was miserable. The social distancing and the contact tracing and the mandatory vaccines and the mandatory mask, which how many of you have seen a swimmer in the water wearing a mask? No, but they certainly tried. We essentially waterboarded ourselves every day. Dealing with all that was not fun. That was the end of my sophomore year. We were eventually able to come back junior year. And my junior year, this is when I concluded my junior season, finishing 7th in the country, which it wasn't my best time, but I was proud of this. You're top 8, you're an All-American. It's a pretty high honor. But it was right then and there that I placed 7th in the nation my junior year that I set a goal for my senior year to win a national title, which would, of course, mean becoming the fastest woman in the country in my respective event. And so, senior year rolls around, and I'm right on pace to achieve this goal. About midway through my senior season, about November of 2021, I was ranked 3rd in the nation in the 200 free, trailing the girl in second by a few 100ths of a second, a girl I knew very well. But the swimmer who was leading the nation, by body lengths, might I add, was a swimmer that none of us had heard of before. And this is the first time we became aware of a swimmer named Leah Thomas. Lots of red flags at the time. Keep in mind we hadn't seen a photo of this person, or else things probably would have been a little more clear. But for all we knew at the time, this was a senior from University of Pennsylvania, which is not a school that historically produces fast swimmers. I would argue this is not a school that has really historically produced anything good. So if you got your degree from there, return to Cinder. A senior from UPenn leading the nation, again, by body lengths and events ranging from the 100 freestyle, which is, of course, a sprint event, and all of the freestyle events in between through the mile, which is, of course, long distance. And for those of you who might not necessarily understand swimming, think about that in terms of your Olympic runners. It's like saying your best 200-meter runner is your best marathon runner. It doesn't happen. They're two totally different systems. But that's what we were seeing in this person. And so I'm scratching my head. I'm trying to figure out who this person is. I'm looking up the name Leah Thomas on this database that tracks your progression and your times. There's no history of this person until that season. None of it made sense. And we continued to stay in the dark until an article came out disclosing in a blip of a sentence, as if we were supposed to just read right over it, word for word. It says, Leah Thomas is formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team at University of Pennsylvania before deciding to switch to the women's team. And then the article just carried on. And so my coach, he sent me the link. He said, hey, you need to read this, because he knew my goals. He knew how hard I worked day in and day out. And so, of course, I read it, and then I read it again, and then I read it a third time to make sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. And of course, I was shocked. We were all shocked upon reading this. But really how I felt was this overwhelming sense of relief. Like, oh, duh, it's a man. That's why he's beating everyone. Makes sense. There's no way he'll be able to compete with us. And at this point, I went to look up who Will Thomas was. Was this at least a lateral movement? Someone who went from ranking amongst the best of the men to now continuing to rank amongst the best of the women? Which is, of course, not what we saw. We saw this was a mediocre man, and that's generous, a less than average man, ranking 554th in the nation the year prior when competing against the men. To, again, now not just number one, dominating the entire country, every girl in the nation, dominating the entire nation of women. But that's why I say I felt relieved, because I thought that the NCAA would see it how I saw it, and how my parents saw it, and how my coaches saw it, how my teammates saw it, how my other competitors saw it, how anyone with any amount of brain activity would probably comprehend this. Nothing hateful about it, nothing even opinionated about it. The mere facts on the paper in front of us that this was not a lateral movement. But lo and behold, the NCAA did not see it that way. They saw nothing wrong with this. And so about 3 weeks before our national championships in March of 2022, they announced that Thomas's participation in the women's category was a non-negotiable, meaning there was nothing that we could do as female athletes. There was no questions that we could ask. There was no concerns that we could raise. We were told we had to accept this with a smile on our face. And let me just say, I don't claim to speak for every single girl on that pool deck. No, of course not. But I do claim to speak for the overwhelming majority of us, because I can wholeheartedly attest to the tears that I saw. Not just the tears from the moms watching in the stands as their daughters are being obliterated in the sport that they once loved, but the tears from the girls who placed 9th and 17th and missed out on being named an All-American by one place. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the extreme discomfort in the locker room when you turn around, there's a 6'4", 22-year-old man, fully intact, fully naked, fully exposing himself, inches away from where you were simultaneously fully undressed. And I can wholeheartedly attest to the whispers, because that's what they were. They were whispers of anger and frustration from those girls who, just like myself, had worked our entire lives to get to this meet. And so that first day was the 500 freestyle, which is not an event that I typically do. And so I watched on the side of the pool as Thomas swam to a national title, to no one's surprise, beating out Olympians, beating out American record holders. Keep in mind, these aren't scrubs, okay? They're the most impressive and accomplished female swimmers this world has ever seen. And he beat them all by body lengths. 1 second might not sound like a lot of time, but in the sport of swimming, a sport that's measured down to the 100th of a second, 1 second is significant. He beat the entire country of girls by 2 seconds. Even the time he went that season would have beat every girl in the nation the next season by 2 seconds. He became the first man to win a Division I NCAA women's title. Yeah, trailblazer. But the next day was the 200 free, which is the event that he and I raced in. So, of course, you get on the blocks. We dove off. We swam 8 laps of freestyle, touched the wall at the end. I look up at the scoreboard, and almost impossibly enough, we had gone the exact same time down to the 100th of a second, meaning we had tied, which, 1, is incredibly embarrassing for a 6'4" man. He couldn't even beat me. But 2, it's rare, right? You're racing for 1 minute and 40 seconds and not even 1/100th separated us. You can't tell me that's not divine intervention. But we get out of the water. We go behind the awards podium where the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself, Thomas towering over me, and this official says, "Great job, you two, but you tied." And we only have one trophy, so we're going to give the trophy to Leah. Sorry, Riley, you don't get one. Yeah. My heart rate was still high, having just competed. My adrenaline was still pumping, and so the first thing that I thought ended up being the first thing that I said, and the first thought that I had was, isn't this everything that Title IX was passed to prevent from happening? What do you mean you're going to give the trophy to the man in the women's 200 free? To which he didn't know what to say. They didn't give him a script of what to say when someone asked why. And so he's stumbling on his words, and he's, we're just doing this in chronological order, is what he said. And so I said, okay. Do you mean alphabetical order? Because G comes before T. Otherwise, I have no idea what you're being chronological about. We tied. And this is when, understand, his face changed. He looked sad. He sounded sad. I could tell. He didn't even believe what he was about to say. But I appreciate his honesty because he looked at me and he said, "Riley, I'm so sorry, but we've been advised as an organization that when photos are being taken, it's crucial that the trophy's in Leah's hands. Again, you can pose with this one, but you have to give your trophy back. Leah takes the trophy home. You go home empty-handed, end of story." That was it for me. That was the moment when we knew all season. And when I say we, I genuinely mean my whole team. I would say 99% of other competitors who I came in contact with, who I talked with. We knew all season that the unfair competition was wrong. We knew that the locker room was wrong. We knew that the silencing that we were facing from our universities, we knew all of that was wrong. Of course we did. But it wasn't until this official reduced everything we had worked our entire lives for down to a photo op to validate the feelings and the identity of a man. That is when I really decided that I could no longer wait, is what it was, because truthfully, that's what I was doing. I was waiting. I was waiting for someone else to say something because I thought someone else would. I thought surely there will be a coach who says something. Surely someone within the NCAA, someone with political power, some other swimmer, someone's dad, quite frankly, would come down there and yank this man out of our locker rooms. I thought someone who was supposed to be protecting us would protect us. But I remember distinctly the moment when I'm standing on the podium, sharing my placement with a man towering over me, holding this trophy I know I have to give back. All the while I'm smiling, okay? I'm cheering, I'm clapping. And it hit me. What in the world was I clapping for? I was clapping for our own erasure, our own demise. And this realization of, Riley, how in the world could you, as a woman, as a female athlete, expect someone else to stand up for you if you aren't even willing to stand up for yourself? This has to come from you. I felt overwhelmed with a sense of personal conviction. I felt guilty is how I felt for even participating in the farce. I felt responsible. So the unfair competition, along with the locker room, which if I had to see it, you guys at least have to hear about it, which will keep it PG. But really, I just want you to put yourself in our shoes, or better yet, put your daughters in our shoes. Right? Okay, so we're in the locker room, changing into your racing suit, which they're paper thin, they're skin tight. It takes about 20 minutes at least to really poke and prod yourself into these suits, 20 minutes of which you're fully exposed. And I think we can all agree a locker room's not a comfortable place in general, but growing up a swimmer, you almost become comfortable being vulnerable in that environment. I can't even tell you in words how that vulnerability is stripped. When you have your back turned, again, putting on your suit, and all of a sudden you hear a man's voice in that changing space. And you look around, turn around, and you look up because he's towering over everyone. and you see a man taking off his women's practice suit, fully naked, fully intact, as I said, fully exposing himself, inches away from us. It's awkward, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable. It was innate, really inherent for every girl in that changing space to cover themselves, whether it was with their towel or their clothes or their hands, and to get out of the locker room as quickly as they could. But really it felt like, it was an utter violation. And it was traumatizing. And not even traumatizing because of what we were forced to see or how we were forcibly and non-consensually exploited. But it was traumatizing for me to know just how easy it was for those people who created and enforced these policies to totally dismiss our rights to privacy without even a second thought, without even bare minimum forewarning us that this would be the arrangement. Again, and I briefly alluded to the silencing we face, which I could truly, I could stand up here the rest of the time and speak to the ways and the tactics they use to intimidate us that were effectively forcing us into submission. As just speaking for myself here, I had to go to sensitivity training where I learned about how by being just cisgender, as they call it, I was an oppressor. I was oppressing Leah Thomas. I had to learn how to use, as a 21-year-old senior in college, an outside professional came in, whatever that means, sat me down and taught me how to use she, her pronouns. It was a mock interview setting. I had to answer the interview questions to her standard. If I didn't, I had to re-go through the training until they were satisfied. That literally the verbiage they used was, until I was re-educated. That's what they said. Thomas's teammates, 16 of these girls, signed on to an email expressing their discomfort in the locker room, sent it to their university. Their parents were signed on to the email. Some of these girls were victims of sexual assault in the past, one of them in particular, in a bathroom setting. It was incredibly triggering and traumatic for her to be exposed in this way to, again, a naked man on a daily basis, 18 times per week, actually. To which their university, I swear I have a screenshot of what the university said back. They said, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here are some counseling resources that you should seek in an attempt to re-educate yourselves. And the counseling resources were provided by none other than the LGBTQ Education Center on campus. Their university went as far as to tell these girls that if you do speak out, and any harm whatsoever comes towards Thomas's way, whether it's physical harm, emotional harm, self-inflicted for that matter, they said, then understand you are solely responsible. And that would make you responsible for a potential death, and that would make you a murderer. And you don't want to be a murderer, do you? No, so I suggest you be kind, and I suggest you be inclusive. That's what they told these girls. And let that really sink in. They told these girls they would have blood on their hands. They would be murderers if they advocated for fair play and privacy in areas of undressing. That's what we call emotional blackmail, gaslighting. Anyways, like I said, I could truly stand up here the rest of the time and just continue down that path. But in short, believe it or not, that's the in short version. That's how I got here. But more importantly than the how, and really something we should all be asking ourselves is why, right? Why first and foremost, why is this happening? Which as a Christian, I feel entirely confident in answering why this is happening. Because the Bible tells us why this is happening. We're told, we're warned. Paul warns us several times throughout Acts and Romans and different places. He tells us that we'll reach a point where these spiritual battles intensify, where dark is seen as light and bitter is seen as sweet and evil is seen as moral. And it's undeniable that that's not where we're at now. And allow me to be clear, this isn't me saying that I think people who identify as trans are evil. No, I don't think that. But deceit is evil. Manipulation is evil. Lying and affirming delusions, that's evil. And who's the father of lies? Who moves in darkness and through deceit? Satan does. But But from a worldly perspective, right, why? Why do I so fiercely and so passionately want to defend this topic? Make no mistake, this is a lot broader than just women's sports. This is a lot bigger than not being able to hold the dinky little $5 production trophy on the podium. This is so much bigger than that. The premise of this debate, the gender ideology movement as a whole, is that, yes, we're being asked to deny biblical truth, but we're also being asked to deny objective truth, biological reality, the most basic of truths at that we have never struggled to understand in the nearly 250 years we've been established as a country, and far before that. The truth of man and woman. Hate to break it to every single person in this room, never mind every single person on this planet. You're all here from man and woman, and we're being asked to deny that. That's as if we're being asked to deny that the sky is blue, or being told to say that 2 + 2 is 5. Holistically here, to just lay out a couple pieces that I have had to really grow to understand and learn how they matter. Right, this shift in language that we've seen. I adhered to calling myself a biological woman at first. I thought it was necessary. I thought, that's how I'll make the distinction. I'm a biological female. Thomas is a biological male. Took a lot of upper-level math courses in college. And so I'm sitting there one day, and I'm like, if this was an algebra equation, wouldn't those words just cancel out? Like, why are we saying that? Why do we have to add that prefix of biological? And then it hit me what we were doing. Because when we do that, we're playing their game. It's the first step in admitting, even subconsciously, even if you don't know that you're admitting this, you're subconsciously admitting that there's an unbiological alternative to being a man or a woman or a male or a female or a girl or a boy. And there's not. God created the only distinction we will ever need when he created man and woman. The verbiage of sex reassignment surgery, in its nature, it doesn't sound overly harmful. But again, when you say that, even if you don't know it, you're admitting that you can reassign your sex. You cannot. There's no amount of hormones, there's no amount of surgeries, there's nothing you can do that can change or alter who God so perfectly and intentionally created you to be in his image. There's nothing you can do that can alter that. And if you try, you're playing God. And we know how that turns out. So be mindful, all of that to say, be mindful of the words that we use. Have you noticed it's no longer woman, actually, or female, or mother? We've seen this in various states. I don't know if we've seen it here in Washington, actually, but we have seen it in Indiana and California, Maine, Michigan, introducing bills that would change the word female in state statute. To person, to cervix haver, to uterus owner, to menstruator, to bleeder, to chest feeder, to birthing person, birth giver, egg producer. The list goes on. And do you know in our medical peer-reviewed published journals, the peer-reviewed journals that our healthcare providers and medical students look to, they don't refer to female anatomy anymore as to what it has historically been called. No, it's now called a bonus hole. Yeah, I can't even make sense of that because anything else wouldn't be gender inclusive enough. Be mindful of the words that you use because they do have power. Again, the denial of truth, the shift in language, the breakdown of our faith. We used to be a country that proudly lived by the slogan of one nation under God or in God we trust. The breakdown of family, the family unit, pinning parents and kids against each other. The breakdown of our freedoms, such as the freedom of speech. The propaganda that's being spread through the media, preying on our most vulnerable, that being women and children. If you look at all of this for what it is, it only points in one direction. And the direction that it points in is Marxism, right? You talk to someone from North Korea or China or Russia or Cuba or Nazi Germany or Brazil or Venezuela or the Czech Republic or any of these countries that have currently or at one point embraced this socialist, communist, Marxist regime. And they'll tell you that it's a slippery slope. And it's a slippery slope that by the hands and feet of our own leaders here in this state, of course, our leaders in the White House, that we're actively being led down, which sounds grim and it sounds chilling, and yeah, maybe from a worldly perspective, sure, but how I'm able to do this with a smile on my face and an incredibly light heart is because we already know who wins the war. Actually, we already know who has won the war, sorry. So... But anyways, to very briefly mention the impact that's been had, because it really has been remarkable over the past 2 years, the momentum and traction surrounding not even just this issue. I would say a lot of the cultural and social issues, which I think shows how the pendulum has swung and it's finally restoring. Now 24 states have enacted some sort of fairness in women's sports bill, ultimately protecting sports on the basis of sex. Washington is not one of those states. I don't think that you guys are surprised by this, but that's not to say that you don't have wonderful leaders who are fighting for you. But as I expressed earlier, they have a big hill to climb, but they are certainly fighting for you and your values. We have now seen 7 states, I believe 7 states, pass a bill that ultimately, I can't even believe it's necessary, that codifies and defines the word woman in law. We shouldn't be surprised that this is necessary, considering we have a sitting Supreme Court justice who can't even answer what a woman is because she says she's not a biologist. Well, guess what? I'm not a veterinarian, but I know what a dog is. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And it's no surprise that this is the same Supreme Court justice who I think a couple weeks ago in an interview, she said she felt like our First Amendment rights were hamstringing the government. Precisely. That is exactly what our First Amendment rights are supposed to do. That's why we have the Bill of Rights. And if our government can't understand or abide by that, that's precisely why we have our Second Amendment. So no surprise there. But anyways... So it's been passed in Kansas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Arkansas, Idaho, I believe one other state. So we're seeing great things being done there. I would argue it's not only necessary we define this word woman, I would say it's urgent that we do this. The federal level, I mentioned Title IX, right? The federal civil rights law that at one point prevented discrimination on the basis of sex. Now we have an administration in the White House and a wonderful Department of Education who has entirely rewritten Title IX, abolished Title IX as we once knew it, as many of you in this room fought for. That's been rewritten. They took this 37-word piece of legislation enacted in 1972 under President Nixon, 37 words, only one word being activity, which allowed Title IX to be what it was most notable for, which is giving equal opportunity in sports. Much broader than that, but that's what it's most notable for. President Biden took these 37 words, rewrote it into nearly 500,000 words, 1,577 pages from 37 words. That should tell you everything you need to know. But, of course, take away all the fluff. What he's done is equate sex with gender identity. Meaning, men can take academic and athletic scholarships away from women. Do you know UW, University of Washington, was the first school to give a male a full ride scholarship to play volleyball coming up. Tate Dragasset is his name. He lied. He concealed his sex. The university says they didn't know that he was a male because he told them he was a female. I presented this to the university. Hey, did you know that you've given a scholarship to a boy to play on your volleyball team. And I understand UW has a good volleyball team. They said, no, we didn't know. We didn't know this. I don't believe that for a second. But the threat of this getting public attention, they rescinded the scholarship. But that's all allowed now under this new Title IX rewrite. Men would have full access to bathrooms, locker rooms, changing spaces on college campuses. Your speech would be compelled. You would be forced to use biologically incorrect but preferred pronouns. Men can be housed in dorm rooms with women. And if you, a 17-year-old girl who's housed with a male, go off to college away from your family for the first time, you're housed with a male, if you feel uncomfortable about this, and you go to your administration and express your discomfort, you would be guilty and charged with sexual harassment. No, not the man parading around your locker room. No, to President Biden, that's considered brave. He said it many times. He said, these are the bravest and most inspiring people I've ever met. But you calling a spade is grounds for sexual harassment. So, of course, lots of work being done at the federal level to ultimately combat, again, this illegal administrative rewrite. He didn't go through Congress, so it's certainly being fought back in the courts. Over 20 states are suing the Department of Education, which is wonderful news. I don't think we would have seen that 2 years ago. So it really shows the momentum. Again, Washington is not one of those states that is suing. Who is your attorney general here? That was all I needed to hear. Whatever your name is. I'm kind of ashamed I don't know his name, but Sideshow Bob. Oh, that's who you were talking about. Okay, this is my public call. I'm looking into a camera. I don't know. Attorney General Sideshow Bob. The parents in this room, this female athlete, the countless other athletes in this room call on you to push back and sue the Biden administration for their illegal administrative rewrite of Title IX. Yeah. So, I hope you heard that, Sideshow Bob. That's more claps than Biden would get at any rally. Anyways, lots of work being done. Certainly lots of work to continue being done. But to just put a bow on it, what we can do as everyday people, first and foremost, and most importantly really, is to trust God's calling for you. I by no means felt prepared for this. This is never something I wanted. This is never something I sought after. It's still not something I want. When I was, of course, in high school and college, I never had to take a government course, not even one, which is pretty concerning now that I look back on it. I knew nothing, seriously nothing, about our civil process or civics in general. I knew we had 3 branches of government. Didn't know what they did. I still don't know what they do. I don't even think they know what they do, to be totally honest with you. My public speaking courses in college, my face turned the color of a tomato. Okay, by no means did I feel equipped. And I would often ask, God, why me? I'm not someone who has been prepared for this. But I learned it early on. He doesn't call those who are prepared. He prepares those who he calls. And if he brings you to it, he will certainly bring you through it. He provides me, I pray for it daily. He provides me with the strength and the wisdom and the discernment and the protection and the guidance and the direction to continue on. Really, it's an unworldly sense of those things. I'm really not that smart. Not that I'm saying anything overly profound. I'm just saying that men and women are different. That's quite literally it. And you can't change your sex. That's it. But he provides those things. Just as he did with Moses, who led the Israelites out with Aaron and his staff, and just as he did with Joshua, who he promised a victory over the Canaanites, and just as he did with Esther before she was brought before the king. So trust is calling for you. And understand we're a body of Christ. Not everyone, we all have different roles, right? Not everyone has to get on a stage or in front of a camera or hold a microphone. Some people are the hands, some people are the feet. Unfortunately for my poor husband, I've always been the mouth. But we all have a different role. But to ignore when he calls, to not answer that call, is disobedience. So trust is calling for you. I think it's important to mention to parents who are here, be willing to defend your daughters. They so desperately need you. Even though I was an adult at the time, right? I was 21 years old, competing. Technically an adult. I was still looking for the adults who I deemed to be the adults in the room to stand up for us. So defend your kids. Defend your daughters. Teach your sons how to be strong men. I think that's important. So much of this conversation is centered around girls and women, and understandably so, and we ask ourselves the question of where are the feminists, which don't even get me started on that question. But just as often as we ask ourselves the question of where are the feminists, we should be asking ourselves the question of where are the men? We're a nation in decline. We're a nation in decline for several reasons. One, because we are a godless society. We live in a godless society. But two, it's because we are led and governed by weak-kneed, spineless, morally bankrupt cowards. In every institution, not even just in the White House. I mean in corporate America. I mean in academia. Even seemingly our spiritual leaders. Not all of them. We have some really phenomenal spiritual leaders. This church seems like a wonderful congregation and a wonderful body. But I hear from many pastors who say, well, I don't want to get political. I don't want to get political. Jesus wasn't a politician, that's what they'll say. Excuse me? I think he spent his time traveling, going around, speaking to the cultural issues that were affecting his people. I would call that a politician. Nonetheless, this issue it's not an issue that in its nature is political. It's inevitably become politicized, but this is not a political issue. Anyways, all of that to say, we need strong individuals, but I would say certainly strong men who are willing to fulfill their biblical role of protecting and providing. It's amazing to me that this stand that I have taken has been deemed brave. I get called brave all the time, and it makes me laugh because, like I said, I don't feel brave. I really don't. It's the easiest thing in the world to say what I'm saying. It really is. Like I said, I'm just saying there are two sexes. I'm saying you can't change your sex, and each sex is deserving of equal opportunities, privacy, and safety. It's astonishing that that's considered brave. No, you know what's brave? You know who is really brave? It's people who fought for this country. It's our first responders. It's our law enforcement. That's who's brave, okay? Not someone like me. But I understand the threats and the risk. I understand they exist. But my favorite Bible verse, it always has been, is Romans 8:18. Romans 8 is my favorite chapter in the Bible. But Romans 8:18, which is, for our present sufferings aren't worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed in us. And I loved this verse when I was younger because I applied it to swimming, honestly. The present sufferings, it was the practice. It was the time. It was the hours, the sacrifices that you had to make. That was the present sufferings. But it paled in comparison to breaking a record or going a best time or winning a championship. It made it all worth it. But that verse is so much more applicable in my life now than it ever was when I was swimming. Right? The present sufferings, okay, it's the name calling, which is what we do in like second grade. I've been called them all. Transphobic, homophobic, racist, white supremacist, domestic terrorist, a fascist. These are really just terms of endearment at this point. Which is pretty sad because in their true meaning, these are horrible words, but they're thrown around like they're nothing. The National Organization of Women, Now, right, the leading feminist group, I think 2 weeks ago, they released an article saying that I was a white supremacist patriarchist. I don't even know what that means. So that's the present sufferings. It's the petty personal attacks. People saying, oh, well, you should have just tried harder. Thank you. I never thought of that. I actually never thought to just train harder. Thank you. And this is coming from someone like Keith Olbermann, who's never played a sport probably in his entire life. It was so funny. The other day, it was State Senator Scott Wiener in California, which, like, of course that's his name. Of course it is. He's on the House floor in California, and he's spouting off all these things about me, saying that I'm, again, you name it, he said it on the House floor. And so this video is on Twitter, and so I comment back, and I said, of course, he's like this big. He weighs probably 110 pounds. So I comment back, and I'm like, it's always the people who have never played a competitive sport in their entire life. And he commented back, and he said, clearly you've never heard of the Gay Kickball League. And I commented back again, and I said, allow me to repeat myself. It's always the people who have never played a competitive sport in their entire life. Anyways, it's the people saying, oh, well, your hair extensions look bad. I'm like, this is my real hair, so thank you. That's just a compliment. That's what we're up against, okay? It's mild when you look at it like that. When you're secure enough to know what you're fighting for, who you're fighting for, those things pale in comparison, which again applies to that verse of Romans 8:18. Couldn't be more grateful for you guys. Truly, it's an honor to be here in front of people who don't want to like burn me at the stake. It's been a long day. We flew in this morning. I left my purse on the flight, which of course I did. I always do that though. And then I just did Jesse Waters' show and then did this, and then I'll fly back, and it's just a whirlwind of a day. I just released a new book this week too. It's called Swimming Against the Current, Fighting for Common Sense in a World That's Lost Its Mind. So it's been just a whirlwind this past week. But I feel very happy to be in Washington, and I hope I come back soon. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you to you for spending a Friday night on this, and I hope that you are enthusiastic to go get to work. And praise God for places like this and people like you, and I pray you get home safely. Thank you for coming.